Okay, welcome back to our DSS summer webinar series. We've got an action-packed webinar series this time. We've actually got five different webinars happening over the summer every 2 weeks. So obviously we've got Stevie on tonight about tapering your training load. We've got Brian Cuthbert. He's going to be coming on 2 weeks' time. Then we've got Barry Milan, our hurling coach. Quiva Morris is also on, our rugby coach, in June. And then finishing off the series in June the 20th is sports scientist Shane Malone. So, big action-packed summer webinar series. We've got Stephen on tonight. Stevie, you're very, very welcome. I'll leave it in your hands there, Stevie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. You can hear me okay, Joe? Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah. Well, I suppose, Joe, the topic of tonight is obviously to taper your team to train smarter and not harder. And I suppose it's very topical now because we have a situation where most club teams are back, and this is probably going to be directed mostly at club coaches because at club level, there's obviously a consistent flow of games, and I can speak from experience later on in the presentation about the situation in Down, for example, the Down leagues, where players are getting 15, 16 games this year before the championship, and then they're getting obviously a minimum of 2 games in the championship. So you're talking about the guts of 17, 18 games. But there's some very interesting slides tonight. There's some interesting things that popped up in the last week or so from some of the top physios in the north of Ireland who have raised serious concerns about the volume of training that players are exposed to. So we're going to look tonight at tapering. What is tapering? What is training smarter and not harder, and the benefits from it? And hopefully the coaches here tonight will take something from it, Joe. We also have a number of games that we can sort of share that are sort of specific to specific scenarios within a game. But anyway, moving on. So a quick brainstorm to start off with, and I like to get people's thoughts early and gauge people early. As a coach, what do you understand about the term tapering? Now, if there's anything you want to fire into the chat box, if it's a buzzword, if it's if it's a couple of sentences, anything at all, just give you about 60 seconds, or if anybody wants to be brave enough to pen anything into the chat box, don't feel under any pressure if you have to, but it would be great to hear people's thoughts on it before we start, just as an understanding of what you understand by the term tapering, or maybe you don't understand anything by it. It's up to yourself there if you want to pen something into that chat box there quickly for us, and we can see if there's anybody going to pick up. There's a couple coming in there. Unloading, load management, reducing training loads. Reduce the training load in weeks running up to a game such as a championship. Excellent. Reduce the exercise before games. Super. Okay, so a couple of great ones there, guys. So literally a very, very simple definition of tapering. It's simply described as a reduction in training load prior to competition. So we look at that word load and think, what does this mean? Is it time? So there's obviously considerable debate, coaches, okay? There's considerable debate over whether the volume should decrease. There's considerable debate over whether the intensity should decrease, whether the intensity should remain the same. There's debate over whether you should trim the intensity but maintain the volume. There's also debate over whether you should reduce both. And what I wrote there is experience matters. And I'm a huge believer in, if you make mistakes and you learn, they're not mistakes. And this is the thing, I've made mistakes in the past training teams, and I'm going to share some of those with you. And from those mistakes, we have actually corrected them, and we've gained gains from them. Learning what was well and what did go well and what didn't go well, and a number of pre-seasons, being involved in obviously 12 senior pre-seasons at club level, and being involved in about 5 or 6 at county level. It gives you a level of experience of what works and what didn't work. And obviously, we don't all have access to GPSs and sports science and things like that. So sometimes a lot of it, guys, is down to literally just experience. and how it worked for you and how it didn't work for you. So if we look at convincing coaches and players, this for me is probably the biggest challenge that we have, is to convince coaches, but particularly players, that you're not going to actually lose fitness during a reduced period of training. So a wee story emerged over the weekend of a club side here locally who are training away and training very hard, and they're back and they're doing 3 nights a week, and like most clubs. And the lads then took, I think, a day off because the pub's open on Friday, funny enough. And I think they took a day off training or whatever it happened to be. And they decided they would do something then over the weekend because they didn't want to lose that week. You know, and you're thinking to yourself, are players really going to lose that much by giving them 4, 5 or 6 days off? You know, and this is the biggest challenge we have, guys. Not just convincing coaches or educating coaches, but actually convincing players that sometimes less is certainly more. And in fact, a lot of the time, less is definitely more. And there's a few interesting ones from this. So I've asked the question there is, how true is this? Okay, so is it true that you can lose your fitness during a period of reduced training? Well, I did a bit of research in the lead up to this presentation, and here's some interesting ones. So back in time again, University of Illinois in Chicago, 1981. There was 21 athletes were analysed coaches in a tapering study. So there was 2 different types of tapering used, okay? And these athletes were a mixture of bikes, runners, just a mixture of general athletes in general, okay? And what they did was they took them, these athletes were training strenuously for 6 days a week. Okay, and they were doing, some of them were doing 3 days of running, 3 days of biking, and they were doing literally, you know, a huge high volume coaches of training, a massive high volume of training. So what they did was in the experiment, they reduced the training load by 67% volume. Okay, so the volume of the training would be, you know, obviously the time and what you're actually packing into it. So not the intensity. The intensity was maintained. Okay. So during this study, they decided that they would reduce training by approximately 2/3 of what the athletes were doing initially. And they brought it right back down. So they were initially doing, for example, 30, 40-minute running sessions. And these were brought right back down to a higher intensity of around about 10, 12 minutes. Okay, and the same with the bikes. And instead of the frequency of the sessions being maybe 4 sessions or 6 a week, they went down to 4. But they maintained the intensity at a very high level. So the result of this was that there was actually no fitness loss for 15 weeks. Now that's a seriously significant piece of information, that by reducing the volume over such a period of time, but retaining the intensity, there was actually no fitness loss in these athletes for 15 weeks, right? 15 weeks. So a wee bit more evidence. Back in the mid-80s, okay, again over in the USA, because obviously back in the 80s and 90s, the USA was obviously, you know, hugely ahead when it came to sports science. The results in Olympic competitions and the likes of that would have dictated that for you. It was the place to be when it came to obviously groundbreaking techniques, and they had the best athletes, the best equipment, the best facilities, and obviously the likes of the UK and Europe have caught up quite significantly recently. But this was an interesting study done on swimmers, okay, back in the mid-80s, where they cut the volume of training, cut the volume again by 68%, and retained a mammoth amount of intensity in their training. And muscular power soared, and performance, which is more important in key swimming events, improved by 40%. Now that's a very, very interesting, significant statistic, that their performance improved more than anything. Was this a case, coaches, of mental freshness, of physical freshness, or maybe both? And then another study in McMaster University in Canada in 1990, a sports scientist there by the name of Duncan McDougall. And this was a major breakthrough. This was the major breakthrough because this was a phenomenal intensity, or sorry, a phenomenal cut in volume, 90%. Okay, so he cut the training by 90%, but he kept the intensity insanely high, and the performance of those runners improved by 21%. Now, when you consider that a large proportion of our game does consist of running. You know, when you think about it in Gaelic football or hurling or the likes, like running is still a large percentage of the game, and physical condition is still a large percentage of the game and a large part of a player's conditioning. And when you consider all this, the same key principles, guys, can be applied to our footballers, our hurlers, our commodes. So just different types of taper to give you a little bit of background knowledge before we move to the more specific GA stuff. There's 4 types of taper, guys. Okay, so there's a linear taper, exponential slow taper, and an exponential fast taper, and then there's a step taper. And what I mean by the linear taper is probably the most common one, and it's a progressive reduction in training. So, for example, guys, over the course of a month, in week 1, you might reduce the training by 5%, in week 2 by 10%, in week 3 by 15%, and then maybe in week 4, 20%. Okay, and people think that when you talk about taper, that it has to be in line with like a major event or a championship game. No, this can be the whole way throughout the season. You can taper yourself the whole way throughout the season. If you've got a consistent basis of league games, you can taper in the lead up to all these games. The exponential slow is more of a relatively slow, non-linear decline in loads. It's more of a steeper, and we'll show it in the graph in a second. And the fast one is more or less the opposite of that, where the decline in the volume is a lot faster. The step, it's literally one huge standardized reduction in training. So, for example, a step taper may be like a 50% decrease in the volume of training for a week or 2 weeks. Now, here's a little graph, okay, which gives you an idea of the different types of taper. So you have the linear taper, you have the exponential taper, the slow decay, and the fast decay. And you can see obviously how steep that reduction is in the number of days, okay? And then you see the step taper, which is just a huge reduction, one chunk reduction, which lasts for whatever amount of days. That's based over 14 days there. And you can see from the linear taper that obviously that's a more progressive type of taper if you decide to use any type of tapering with the teams that you're involved with. Okay, but tapering works, guys, our coaches. Tapering works, but it's the intensity that counts. So I think the key thing is that when we are examining tapering, and we're talking about tapering the team, that we remember the key message is not so much about the length of the session or the time of the session, but it's the intensity that counts. And this is the thing, like, and someone made this point to me, I think it was a strength conditioning coach made this point to me once, and it's a very interesting one if you think about this. If you ask the runner to go out and run 1 mile as fast as he can, say in 4.5 minutes, he's gonna obviously expend. It's going to be a high intensity run. That's the very first thing, okay? And he's going to be sore for a couple of days because he's obviously running at an extremely high intensity. Now, if you asked him to do 4 or 5 mile at a very, very low intensity in it, whatever pace he wanted to do it at, okay, he could probably do that every single day. But could he sprint 1 mile every single day? Probably not to the same level as he wanted to be. So the intensity is what counts, and tapering does work. So just a wee quick one again, guys, and this is where we become a wee bit more GA specific, and this is where we use a lot more GA specific examples. But as a coach, again, I'll give you a minute or so. If anyone wants to contribute, I'd be delighted to hear from anyone. As a coach, what do you understand about the term train smarter? Okay, to train smarter, what do you understand about that? And again, there's no wrong answers. If anybody wants to contribute, they can. If you feel you don't want to, please don't hesitate. But I would like to hear people's opinions on what you understand about the term train smarter. Just come in there, match specific. Okay, excellent. Very good. Make it relevant to the game. Excellent, Barry. Bringing the different aspects of training, physical, technical. Perfect. Okay, train for the game at the weekend. Okay. Okay, so a couple of nice contributions there. So what do you understand by the term to train smarter? So what we have is training smarter is training with a purpose and a thought behind that purpose. Okay, so it's actually going into training, guys, into training coaches with a particular purpose, okay, and a thought process behind that purpose. So you're not just going in training thinking, right, what are we going to do tonight? Well, we were beaten at the weekend, so what we'll do is we'll just run them into the ground. And the amount of coaches that probably still buy in, and this is my worry, that we, as coaches, we buy into this thing that when we win a game of football, or we win a game of hurling, or we win a game of camogie, everything's great, and we're looking at all the great things that we did, and we look at wasn't our 1-to-1 defending tonight brilliant? Wasn't our turnover count excellent? Wasn't our scoring efficiency excellent? Didn't we win so much break ball? And then reverse that. Okay, we're beaten at the weekend, and the talk comes into here. We died in that last 15 minutes. You know, we're not fit. This team's not fit. You know, we need to do some serious running with these boys on Monday night, and that's what happens a lot of the times. That's what happens a lot of the times. And I think when you talk about training smarter coaches, what you need to consider is a number of things. Your session should be player-centered, so you should be thinking of the player. And I always think of this in school, and I think to myself, give yourself the pupil experience. So what would the pupil want? Okay, what would he to have in PE? Or what experience would you like to have if you were a pupil in this class? And, you know, you've got to put yourself in the player's situation. What does a player want? You know, a player wants to be involved in the session as much as possible. He wants to think as much as possible. He wants to be playing games. He wants the ball at the heart of the session. You know, and we talked, I think someone in the chat box mentioned about match specific. So make the training have a number of game specific scenarios. So for example, you've lost on the Friday night. Okay, you've lost on the Friday night and you're coming back to training on the Monday night. And the reason coaches, by the way, I use Friday night as an example, as Joe would probably know this as well. The down club leagues have always been historically played on a Friday evening, which is another fantastic plus in the local leagues. The players on the weekends themselves, so clubs would naturally train on a Monday, Wednesday. But if your games are on a Sunday, you're maybe training then on a Wednesday, Friday, or a Tuesday, Thursday. So you can make this relevant to whatever day your football is on in your own county or your hurling. But you lose on a Friday night and you look back at the game and you think, right, okay, we conceded 3-11 and we scored 1-7. So we look back in the game and we think our defense was terrible. We conceded 3-11 and we only scored 1-7. So we're not going to worry about the forward line, but we're going to worry about the defense because we can't be conceding 3-11. But if you actually went back and looked at the game, you scored 1-7, but you created 32 scoring chances. And you had the ball turned over 18 times. And out of those 18 times, the opposition scored 2-7. So for every time you were turned over, the opposition going to score 1 in every 2. So what you need to work on then in the Monday night is your transition from when you turn it over and what you're going to do with it. And you make a game out of that, or you create a game situation out of that. Or, for example, you were cleaned out in the opposition's kickouts. So you weren't pressing the kickouts. The opposition got 15 short kickouts away and they scored 5 times from it. So if you were to shut down half those, you know, they might have only scored once or twice. And again, you know, you're not looking at that because what you're looking for is you're letting your judgment be clouded by we're not fit, or you're looking at silly things. You're not looking at the game specific scenarios that need to be worked on. That's a massive part of training smarter coaches. And then obviously a high intensity. You want to replicate, and I always believe this is an interesting one for you. So in an average bout of play in Gaelic football, the ball's going to be in play for around about 20, 25, 30 seconds, okay, on average. If you're playing a small-sided game that's lasting for 60 seconds or 70 seconds, the players are going to be performing at a higher intensity than what they're going to be in a game. So you're actually creating a situation which is a hell of a lot more intense than they will ever experience in a game. So intensity is absolutely paramount and so important. And then in Red Bull writing, or what I wrote is recovery matters. And recovery is huge. And I'm going to talk about recovery later on because I don't think the majority of our footballers or hurlers are actually fully recovered properly from previous trainings or previous matches, and therefore they simply can't function at the highest possible level you want on match day. And I think that's something that we as coaches need to be tapering into our training. Anyway, here's a couple of games. Okay, so this is game one. It's a kick-out game. Okay, so you have 3 goals. All right, and you have a 9v9, or you could 10v10 or 7v7, or make the pitch smaller, whatever you have numbers-wise. You might only have 18 at training. If you have 18 at training, you can play 9v9. If you have 22 at training, you can make this game 11v11. Okay, and lengthen the pitch a little bit. But the aim of the game is basically you have 3 goalkeepers, and one team is receiving the kick-out of the 3 goalkeepers. So, for example, you have Paddy, you have Mickey, and you have Johnny there in goals, and the Blues are receiving the kick-out first. So you would call the goalkeeper's name, and the Blues have to react and receive a kick-out off that particular goalkeeper. They can score in any of the other 2 goals. They can score a point or a goal in any of the other 2 goals, but not the goal the kick-out came from. Now, the opposition turn the ball over, they pop a score and get the next kick-out. So it's a 3-goal kick-out game, and it plays something like this. So kick-out delivered to the Blues, pop, 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 score. Next kick-out, Blues again, pop, pop, score. Okay, so it's a high-intensity game. It's game-specific. What is it working on? Well, it's working on awareness. It's working on the player's ability to switch on kickouts, stay alert when the ball goes dead. It's working the goalkeepers as well, because they're in a situation where they're having to make quicker decisions, because on the Friday night when you played, your goalkeeper kicked 3 or 4 short kickouts away. So you're now putting him in a situation where you're putting him in a very game-specific situation, okay? And it's player-centered, and the ball is at the heart of it, and you're thinking of the players, and they will enjoy that game. And there's a score at the end of it as well. Okay, so you're working on a specific aspect of your game. So just moving on. And what we have then is we have another game. Okay, so this is a game played in one half of the field. You split the pitch in half, and it's a high pressing game. So back to your league game on the Friday night, what happened? Well, this situation happened, coaches. Okay, the opposition pressed our defense, and when they pressed our defense high, our defense couldn't get the ball out past the halfway line without turning the ball over, and the opposition got a lot of scores off this. So what am I going to do at training on the Monday night? How am I going to train smarter on the Monday night? Well, first and foremost, I'm going to identify one of the problems that happen in the game, and this can be identified through the naked eye, although that is difficult because you do only recall 30% of the information that you see in the game. So you're only really recalling around about 30%. So what is the best way to analyze? The best way to analyze any game is obviously by video. Okay, so if you look back at the game and you see that number 2 gave the ball away 3 times coming out, number 4 gave it away 5 times, number 5 got turned over 3 times, 6 kicked it away twice, but the opposition press caused you serious problems. So what do you do in this game? Very straightforward. The yellow team kicked the ball deep to the blue team, press them high, and the Blues have to work the ball out. So let's just see it in operation. So yellows kick the ball in, Blues have to work that ball back out. Okay, and for a score. And then what you can do is we'll just play it again. We'll give you a couple of goals of just playing that just so you have an understanding of it. The yellows are pressing very high. Blues are working on trying to break lines, be brave, have a little bit of width in your play, get ahead of the ball carrier, present the ball carrier with options, make sure there's good presentation of the pass, okay, and break with intensity and break with purpose and break with pace. And if they do that, then obviously you're going to work on that and you're obviously going to improve on that aspect of your play. So again, it's smarter, and it's obviously having a purpose. And that's the key thing, guys. Go back to our slide that we talked about 2 slides ago. Training smarter is training with a purpose and a thought behind that purpose. So what is the thought behind this game? Well, the thought behind this game is that our goalkeepers weren't getting short kickouts away, or we weren't defending them effectively enough. So we're going to work on that. Okay, what's the purpose behind the next game? Our defense was turned over coming out with the ball. The opposition will press us high. So what are we going to do? We're going to put our defense into that situation in the game, and we're going to get them pressing high. Okay, so those are just 2 little games, guys. Those are just 2 little games, coaches, to get you thinking about training with a purpose okay, and a thought behind that purpose. Player-centered, ball at the heart of the session, high intensity, game-specific scenarios. So just moving on. So some interesting info to guide us. So, okay, so here's an interesting one for you. It takes approximately 72 hours, guys, to recover from a full GA match. Okay, 72 hours. So that's 3 full days to fully recover from a full GA match, right? And that was a study done many years ago by Ulster GA, where they analysed a number of young athletes who were playing for Sigerson games and county games and underage county games. But how many teams, coaches, or how often do you allow for this type of recovery? So you lose on a Friday night again, and go back to the Friday night scenario. You lose on the Friday night. Players maybe have a few beers, okay, and maybe some of them are out working on a Saturday. Maybe some of them go and play golf on a Sunday. They're not fully recovered by the time Monday comes. Still a few sores, still a few achy joints, still a few torn muscles, small tears that you don't know of. And then Monday night comes, and what do? Run them into the ground. And then we wonder why we're down with injuries. We wonder down with hamstring, soft tissue injuries, calf strains, groin strains, and we're scratching our head going, what are we doing wrong? You're not allowed for recovery. I'll go back to Martin Clark telling me in Australia about the fast twitch muscle fibers of athletes. So some athletes, for example, who were really quick athletes, who had a high percentage of fast twitch muscle fiber. Now, again, this is a professional environment, so we obviously wouldn't be exposed to this, but it's a very interesting study. So a lot of these guys with fast twitch muscle fibers, it was taking them 5 days to recover from an AFL game. 5 days, okay? So consider that for a second. 5 full days to fully recover from an AFL game. And then you wonder why when you watch Premiership teams and you're criticising Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, you're criticising Jurgen Klopp, or you're criticising Pep Guardiola, why is he not playing his strongest team? But in fact, you mightn't think he's playing his strongest team, but he's playing his strongest physical team. He's playing the team that is physically in the best condition to take the field for that game. So certain players who run at a very, very high intensity and who are sprinters. And this is why when you go back to older soccer players, and some of you coaches here tonight will probably know the likes I'm talking about. You look at the likes of like a Michael Owen, who would have been a very explosive individual, who would have relied very much on his pace from an early age, riddled with hamstring injuries, because maybe he wasn't given time to fully recover from games and was propelled into games probably on a regular basis, massive volume of games, probably had to train every day as well. It probably wasn't a culture back in the mid-90s when he burst onto the scene, or late 90s, that, you know, it was sports science, GPS wasn't at the center of everything they do. And I was down in Stat Sports in Newry a couple of months ago with a group from school, and the guys that were there were working with, it was a work experience event, and the guys that were there were working with Tottenham Hotspur. And when Jose Mourinho came into Tottenham Hotspur, he had no time for GPS, didn't want to know about it. Don't park that. Now, the guy before him, Pochettino, PSG manager tonight, he was mad into them. Okay, he fully believed in them. He was mad about the GPS, mad about the stats that came out from them. And one of the things that came out from the study was that Mourinho's team in his first 6 months were the most fatigued team in the Premier League. They were the most fatigued team in the Premier League, and science proved that. So he obviously had to embrace it a lot more. And then in his second season, he did start to embrace it. He eventually got the sack, as he normally does. But my own experience, and I've wrote down my own experience here. So my own experiences with this group, my last coaching role at county level was with Carlos Seniors, and a very enjoyable experience for 3.5 years. And in my first year, I'll show you just a little graphic here. Okay, so here's the two years. So in 2017, in comparison to 2018, okay, and then I'll explain the story behind it. So National League comparison. So there was a National League, and the National League is the only time in Gaelic football or hurling, the only time that there is a consistent run of games for players. And I think we really need to look at the restructuring of our leagues. I think we need to look at the restructuring of our competitions, because I think, to be fair to players, they need a consistent run of fixtures. And it's a bit like the AFA model where they play 15, 16 games. And I think it would be a much, much better season if they did that. And the season was ran over the course of 3 or 4 months, and you got to see the best players playing every week on TV, or you could go to a game every week. If you had, for example, if you're following your own county and they weren't playing on a Saturday night, but say Monaghan were playing in Ulster and you were a big fan of Conor McManus, the ability to go and watch him any weekend you wanted, rather than watch him, once in June and maybe once in July and maybe once in August if you're lucky. And I think that having a run of consecutive fixtures as well would obviously help teams. It would actually even help monitor and regulate training loads at county level, because at the minute you nearly have 3 pre-seasons. You have a pre-season pre-Christmas. Well, I'm going back now to the old leagues, but you would have a pre-season where everyone's trying to get that edge in October and November and the guts in the winter. And then you have a mini pre-season before the league starts again after Christmas, when people maybe go away for a week or 2 at Christmas and enjoy themselves. And then obviously you have a pre-season before the championship, and it just doesn't work. And I think with COVID, we've sort of stumbled upon this split season, and I think it could be a way forward. But without getting off track tonight and chatting about that, because that's obviously a show on its own, we talk about that. But back to my own experience. So in 2017, Carlo's record there is very evident. They finished 3rd in the league. We were very, very unfortunate to miss out promotion by a point. Lost, 2 games disappointingly after coming off the back of good results. So we came off the back of really good results. The first game, draw against Westmeath away, which was the only points they had dropped, and then lost at home to London the following week. Okay, and it's head scratching. And then coming off the back of beating Waterford at home, and then going the following week and losing away to Leitrim. Okay, so these were disappointing results, and they were always coming off the back of something positive. So was it a mental thing or was it a physical thing? And then in 2018, won 6 consecutive games in a row for the first time probably ever. And more interestingly, in 2018, the same team started in every single National League game. No injuries, no soft tissue injuries. There was one lad, Barry John Malloy, unfortunately, God love him, broke his leg in the opening league game against London, broke his leg over in London, and he didn't play for the rest of the campaign, but there was no injuries. Okay, so what did we do differently? Well, I'll have us explain to you here now what we did differently. So what did we do differently? 2017, completely overcooked players. Completely overcooked them during the National League. So during those National League games, we would have trained every Tuesday and Thursday. So you played on a Sunday and you trained really hard on a Tuesday collectively. And then you trained really hard again on a Thursday. And then you went out and played the following Saturday or Sunday. And what we were finding was, by training high volume on Tuesdays and Thursdays post games, we had an increase in injuries, massive increase in injuries. There was somebody different on the table every week in 2017. You had flat performances and you had inconsistencies. And that is unquestionably down to the volume and loads that were being placed on in training. Okay. In 2018, we took a different approach, a massively different approach. In the pre-season of 2018, we had a huge emphasis on S&C, on strength conditioning, and we had a huge emphasis on Pilates. And the players done a lot of Pilates. Half the squad would have done them in Dublin, and the other half would have done them in Carlow. And whoever played on a Sunday didn't train on a Tuesday. And a lot of the players would have did a bit of stretching or Pilates on the Monday night after a game on the Sunday. But those 15 or 17 or 18 or 19 or 20 players who trained or played on the Sunday didn't actually train on the Tuesday night. So they would come to training, they would do a light warm-up, and then they would go with Damien, and Damien would do a bit of static stretching with them. I would take the group who didn't play, okay, and they would do a 35-minute conditioning session through small city games. We placed a massive emphasis on recovery. Recovery was so key. The training was low volume. Even on a Thursday night, the training was low volume, very low volume. Kept a decent level of intensity though, and we did a lot of Pilates, okay? We had 0 injuries, and the same team played every game and were very consistent, and they had a fantastic championship run as well, with really good wins over teams who were 2-3 divisions above them in Leinster, and gave Tyrone a really, really good game in qualifiers as well. So we had a very good season based on what I fully believe was a freshness we picked up a couple of key injuries at the start of 2019 that were actually injuries that came from, one of them actually came from an accident at home to a key player, which made the team suffer badly. But there wasn't a massive volume again in 2019 injuries. But the two comparisons between 2017 and 2018 coaches are extremely interesting. And again, it comes down to experience. We didn't have access to fancy sports science equipment or GPS. In fact, we had no GPS, believe it or not. We were really working off experience. And I think that that's important. Anyway, an interesting trade. So this looks a bit, you're probably looking at the screen going, geez, I can't read all that. I don't want you to read it all, okay? I don't want you to read it all. Just bringing this, oh, sorry. So I'm just bringing this up to you, okay? So this is Marty Locker. So I text Marty and asked him, copyright, is it okay that if I use this tonight to show the coaches? And he had no issue with it at all. This is just over a week ago, coaches, okay? So Marty's one of the top physios in the north of Ireland, okay? He works in his own practice in Cookstown, Performance Lab in Cookstown in County Tyrone. And he's a brilliant physio. Brilliant physio. He's got an excellent business going at the minute, strength conditioning business as well. He works with clubs. I had him in the club last year. Unfortunately, COVID hit and delayed the progress that the guys were making, but he was absolutely top class. Now, Marty's opening tweet, and it's worth coming back. If any's on Twitter, look up Marty's name and have a read through this thread because it's absolutely fascinating. And I'll give you it in short term here what it means. Okay, so Marty talked. This is just over a week ago, coaches. We've had nearly twice as many inquiries for appointments this week than any other week in 10 years that I've been in business. Last year as a sport, returning from lockdown was new. This time it's not, but it's different. So Marty's talking about the fact that players have gone 7 months without training or in games. Okay, last year it was only 3. Normally players would have, in a non-COVID season, coaches, players would play indoor soccer or basketball or kickabouts or things like that. You couldn't even do that, okay? You didn't have gyms, no access to gyms. So it takes a lot of time to build that up. So he talked about coaches. He says, if you think you're taking it easy and you're planning 3 days a week, consider 2. If you're thinking about friendlies already, you're absolutely mad. And I agree with him. I totally agree with him. Most injuries will be soft tissue. He's seen a couple of life-changing injuries, a couple of cruciates, things like that as well. Are they connected to the lack of what you would call action in the last 7 months? Possibly. So he's talking about allowing them time, easing them back in, less is more again. Okay. And he said, look, I've spoken to 2 other clinics today with similar scare stories. Ease off, break them in, take your time. Now, this is the advice of an expert. I'm not a physio, so I'm not an expert when it comes to this. I'm a coach. I have experiences as a coach of conditioning teams and training teams and obviously trying to gauge the volume in which they're training at, the intensity they're training at. But this guy's coming in with a science background, a sports science background, with a physiotherapy background, who has seen a lot of injuries. He's seen a lot of what you would call, avoidable injuries as well. And one of the Zooms that Marty done last year was very, very interesting. The big message from the Zoom that he did last year was, on the return to play, was don't chase 2 rabbits. So what he meant by that was, don't try and get super fit and play football and do the whole lot. Focus on one and stay on that one, until you're ready. Because if you're trying to chase too many rabbits, as he says, you're never going to catch one. So it's just about taking a time, break your players back in gently and really, really ease off. So if you think that if you're doing 3 nights a week, like for example, here in Down, the championship in Down is not until August, end of August, okay? League starts in the middle of July. You don't need to be training 3 nights a week at a high intensity. There's actually no need for it. Because what you're going to find is injuries are going to occur. Someone's just asked a question, but I'll answer that at the end. Injuries are going to occur. You're going to get injuries. You're going to get a dip in form. You're going to get it even mentally, guys, bringing players together for so long. It's just, it can create mental fatigue as well. Anyway, here's a little sort of a traffic light system that I would have designed. So on a return to play, okay, so red amber, green. Okay, so phase one, I'd phased in a sort of a 4-week plan to come back to collective training 1 night a week. Okay. The rest of the week was mapped out for them to do their own little bits and pieces. Okay. And then phase two, after 4 weeks, into 2 nights a week. Okay. Again, recovery in there. You see the word recovery quite a bit. And then phase three, after 8 to 10 weeks, was back into your normal week in which you would have. So when down, a normal week would be train Monday, train Wednesday, match Friday. And then your seconds football is on a Saturday. So anyone that didn't play on the Friday would play then on the Saturday. And phase four then is obviously your in season, your outdoor football, your speed, agility, your quickness, your team play, whatever. And then your league matches on a Friday night, your championship matches. And you can adapt that little plan or that little program there to suit your own team or your own needs. And I know that the south of Ireland are back next week with their clubs. So this traffic light system is something that you could adapt, okay, and use. Because I do feel that you need to be very careful with the club players. County players are slightly different in the fact that they're probably a little bit more, well, they're elite footballers, first and foremost, elite hurlers. So they're going to look after their bodies probably a little bit better. They're going to be, their S&C is probably going to be monitored a little bit more by coaches and stuff like that. But club players are going to come back, and a lot of them guys are going to come back having been experts in the 5K straight line running that you see, which is crazy. Chatting to a runner recently, and he said to me that runners wouldn't even do the volume of 5Ks that GA players are currently doing. So there's a lot to take in, okay, and there's a lot to consider. And again, if you're tapering correctly and you're training smart, then you should be okay. So just looking at success is not how hard you train, but how well you recover. So this is something I can't remember where I seen this quote, but it struck me. I've always said this to groups I'm working with. It's not how hard you train, lads, but it's how well you recover. And it's interesting because when you listen to professional athletes, and I spoke to a number of them in the past, when they talk about after a tough session and they're told by coaches, recover. But our players won't recover because, well, work's unavoidable, okay? Work is unavoidable. So you can't tell them not to work, okay? They have to go to work. But like if they're training on a Wednesday night, and they're going and playing golf, 9 holes of golf on a Thursday evening with their mates, that's not recovering, or they're going and they're doing something silly or whatever. For a couple of years ago, losing a player at county level, in fact, actually. He wasn't a starter, he's a panelist. But we lost him because he was having a game of tag rugby in university on the Tuesday night in between training, like mad stuff. So it's trying to get through to the players that it's not how hard you train, but it's actually how well you recover. And recovery is so important. It is so vitally important. It's something that, guys, I personally believe it's something that should be hammered home every night of training in the exact same way and the exact same message as your kick-outs strategies or your game plans or your defensive setup or your offensive patterns, whatever. Recovery should be emphasized every single night you train. And that recovery can take the form of many things: clothing, garments, compression garments, hydration. Hydration is key. Recovery shakes, food, sleep. Sleep's absolutely pivotal. Okay, so it is vitally important. And it's something that our players are probably a little bit ignorant of and probably don't respect enough, guys. So just before we finish off, okay, some of the key messages from tonight. Well, tapering does work. We know that. It does work, okay. It's the evidence is there to prove that it works. Don't be afraid to reduce your training. Do not be afraid to reduce it, okay. Just because the Joneses down the road are doing an hour and a half, or their players are out in the field for 3.5 hours, and the myth is coming back that Jesus, they trained on Saturday morning from 9 o'clock right through to 9 o'clock that night. They never took a break once. Don't feel you have to do that, okay. Less is certainly more, and we have now evidence to prove that tapering does work, and it will work. Trust me, it will. But the intensity is the key. Keep your intensity high, but also monitor your intensity as well. Train smarter and train specifically. And we've talked quite a bit about that tonight. We've looked at our small set of games, what works, what won't work. Okay, make sure you train. When you are training, you're training with a purpose and a meaning. Recovery matters more than ever. hammer recovery to them. Coaches, you cannot emphasize recovery enough. Hammer recovery to them. And I think the most important thing, in my opinion, is use common sense and experience. Like, it's mad because we've got access to so much knowledge now. We have access to so many coaching manuals, coaching information, even the likes of these webinars. And I'm not an expert. Jesus, I don't think there's any experts in GA, and I mean that genuinely. It's people with experience, and we're fortunate that some people share their experience, others don't. And I'd be delighted when I can tune in and listen to other coaches at club level, at county level, whatever. Doesn't matter what level they're at, because every coach is a good coach and every coach will have experiences. And if you're willing to share your experiences, then obviously sharing is learning. And I think one of the biggest things that we can look at is common sense. For example, it is a small example, but it's an important one. Like the pub's opening on Friday past, like you're dealing with young people who've been locked up for 6 or 7 months. Why would you even entertain training or a match? Why would you entertain anything on that particular weekend when you know young people are looking to get out to the beer gardens and looking to go out with their friends and do things that they have to do, you know, when your season doesn't start for 3 or 4 months. So do use common sense throughout your season. You know, pick your moments, pick your time when you're looking for commitment, but, you know, make sure the players are looked after as well, physically and mentally, because I think that's very important. So if there's any questions, guys, I think there's one there, Joe, came in just from Joe Flynn. If your match was on a Saturday, there's another one coming in. I'll just answer this first one first here. If your match was on a Saturday, would you train on Wednesday instead of Thursday? Well, Joe, believe it or not, I've always preferred to have the extra day recovery before a match. So I would always have preferred to have trained on if there was a match on a Sunday, you know, train on the Thursday, having that full 48 to 72 hours. And I think with the way, it depends what level, Joe, you're coaching. If you're coaching on age level, obviously this is no real burn. But if you're coaching at senior level and maybe, you know, you have aspirations of being successful or bringing the group on, if your match was on a Saturday and you train on a Wednesday, sometimes people think, oh, it's a long time from Wednesday to Saturday. Well, the way technology is now, one of the things that we've learned over lockdown is Zoom's a great outlet now. Friday evening at 9 o'clock, if you're worried about the players not having had any contact since Wednesday, organise a short Zoom on a Friday evening for 20 minutes. Do your little bit of video analysis on the Zoom. Do your little bit of meeting on the Zoom as well. And players don't have to leave their living room. And they can lie in their bed and watch it. They can lie on the sofa and watch it. They can be, you know, in the house, chilled out. They're not having to get out of the house on another night. Nagging girlfriends, nagging wives. They're there. It's only 20 minutes. There's no travel. So Zoom's a great thing now for meetings and things like that. So for me, if you could, on a Saturday, if your matches were on a Saturday, personally, I would train Monday, Wednesday. You know, Monday, recovery session, you know, flush the legs out, work on the guys who maybe weren't playing. And then on a Wednesday, everybody's fit to train and well fit to put in a decent session before the Saturday game there. So hopefully that answers your question, Joe. There's another one there, Joe, about what about young players?
Yeah.
Who are playing for teams, for separate clubs? How do you introduce taper to unpopular coaches? Well, Noel, one of the biggest things that I have always found in the past, and I've experienced this myself with a number of coaches, is coaches do have a huge ego. A lot of coaches sometimes struggle to park their egos for the betterment of the player. And what we've got to understand, I suppose, in my own background, you know, being a teacher, it is all about the student. It's all about the child. They're the young people who are in your care. And as a coach, you have to have that same mindset, even at senior level. I would be very wary and very guarded of all the players, and I would look out for them. Not just being, I would look out for them, not just knowing, to be honest with you, not just being silly here when I say this, but even from a psychological point of view, mental point of view, making sure they're okay, you know, checking in on them. So I do feel that one of the greatest things that you need to try and work on is the communication between coaches, and particularly, you know, those coaches who are working with different sports, as you say, hurling and football. I've experienced it in the past with down hurlers. I had a young lad at the club for 6 years who was playing for down hurlers, and he still is actually. And there would have been a lot of clashes, but it wasn't Ronan Sheehan at the time. It was the previous manager. Jesus, I can't even mind his name now. But I remember making many a phone call to the Down Hurling manager, and I didn't know the man at all. But we both had our own self-centered interests, and we both had to discuss what was the best way forward for the child, or for the it wasn't a child, he was in his early 20s, but what's the best way forward for this young man? Because it's important that we try and look after the player welfare as much as possible, because something, at the end of the day, it's a game of football, it's a game of hurling, and these young lads aren't peace to make. They're young lads who have a lot of other needs as well. So I think communication, Noel, is the best thing that I could advise there. Communication.
And yeah, Noel has just said he is one of those types of coaches, which I can testify to. He is. Any more questions, lads?
No, Joe. I said I could be accused of being one of those coaches. I didn't admit to actually being one.
Coaches,
yeah, I agree. The communication is important, but it's tough when you're banging your head against a brick wall and you're trying to mind the welfare of young players. It's not easy, like.
Absolutely agree, Noel. Coaches, there's a fair degree of information in there tonight. There's some thought-provoking stuff. Any questions on training smarter, or any questions on sort of game-specific scenarios that anybody wants to talk about or anything, feel free for the next couple of minutes. I think we've about 5 or 6 minutes, Joe, left, haven't we?
Yeah, we do. Just Stevie, you see, when you do cut down on that sort of physical volume coming up to the big games, is that an opportunity to do like tactical run-throughs, kickouts, restarts, etc.?
Joe, what I would have done in the past in numerous occasions, Joe, would have been that just maybe even told the players, look, just land down in your tracksuit, your trainers on Sunday morning.
Right.
And we're just going to walk through some of this stuff. And you would have walked through maybe a kick-out strategy, or you made a 3 kickouts or 4 kickouts or something like that. And you might have walked through some of them. It was an opportunity also to speak to individual players one-on-one, opportunity then for lads then to maybe, to create a player-led environment where players went away in smaller groups. Maybe the defenders went away in a smaller group, or the forwards went away, and had a chat among themselves and come back with their own ideas and their own thoughts. Because at the end of the day, Joe, when the players cross that right line as well, you're relying on creating, thinking footballers who can think to the situation that occurs itself on the pitch, and they can play the game. Because a lot of the game, it's not a complicated game. And, yes, there's aspects of it now that have really, really progressed tactically and physically and the likes of that. But, at the end of the day, you have to play what's in front of you. You have to play what you see as a player. They have to play the game as they see it. And it can't be robotic, and it can't be too structured. And I think that's very important as well, Joe.
Any more questions, coaches? But I think you said it earlier, Stevie, just in discussion in general, coaches are fearful to do it. They're fearful of, lowering the load, because if they get beat at the weekend, then all the players are going to turn around and say, it's because we weren't training as hard as, Kilcoo were training. And that's sometimes why coaches don't try it.
So unquestionably, and a lot of it is down to, players can be very fickle at times, and a lot of it is down to more or less convincing them. But I actually think the greater challenge is convincing coaches. That for me is the greater challenge, because everyone has this, we need to do more all the time. We need to catch up on them. We're playing catch up on them. We're doing this, they're way ahead of us. And, the more you tell a group that, the more they start to believe it, So I think it's important, Joe, that we try and convince coaches that less can be more. It can be. And I think if we are smart in the way we approach training, and we create a training environment that, will take players out of their comfort zone without taking them out of their depth, is probably the best way to describe it. And if we can create that with that high intensity environment, then you don't need to be doing an awful lot of conditioning or an awful lot of running. Everything can be done ball centered.
And you sold it there at the beginning, Stevie, with that sort of evidence-based research that was coming through from the United States. If you tell them about the research and that it works, then I suppose that's half the battle. There's a question there, Stevie.
But Stephen, in 2018, Cork used max intensity in your pre-season. Well, always would have commanded a very high intensity, Stephen. But in 2018, I remember it very, very clearly, because in the winter of 2017, what we did, Stephen, was, because the National League started it in January, you were given a very, very limited window, because you lose Christmas. We never ever trained at Christmas. So I just felt that Christmas is a time, geez, you have to draw the line somewhere. But we would have used November, actually. We would have started around about the middle to the end of November. And we would have just trained on a Thursday and a Sunday, 2 nights a week. And on a Thursday, what we did was we played the universities every Thursday night in challenge matches. So 15 players played for 35 minutes, and 15 did a running block with Damien. And then we would have swapped them, and 15 would have played for another 35, and the other 15 would have done a running block. So they did have a good base going into the league. But saying that, we were smart about the running blocks. The running blocks were you were only really talking about maybe a block of maybe 16 runs, 2 sets of 8, and you're only maybe talking about 15-second runs, which is only about 4 minutes of work. So about 8 minutes of conditioning, really, when you think about it, including their match. And then in December, I'm going to be honest with you, I remember the games still very vividly. Like, we would have played a lot of transition games in December, but it would have been all football. There'd been very little running in December. We would only have really done that conditioning block throughout the month of November, like, or those 4 or 5 sessions in November, early December. But that was it. 4 weeks max. Everything else was with the ball. There's one from Joe Flynn there in the county. Thank you, Anne. That's great comment, great feedback. Joe Flynn there, with the inter-county run into July, access to county players will be very limited. So the tapping work be out on the hold until clubs and full complement of players. Joe, this again, and Joe, I'm lucky. I'm working at county level this year. I'm not working at club level, but I honestly do feel that club players have been sold a bit short this year. I'm going to be honest with you. 97% of our playing population are club players, and I think that they've been sold a little bit short. I thought it was a great opportunity for the GAA to hold the county football maybe back and run it with supporters, because by that stage most of the population would have been vaccinated by October time, like last year, and you could have had good crowds at the games, which would have created great atmospheres as well. Obviously, financially, it might have been more viable for them too. But at the minute, I know in Down are doing a very interesting thing, Joe. Okay, and I would be the very first to probably give off that things aren't going well, but I'm also quick to come in and say hats off to them. They've been absolutely top class. They're running a pre-season competition starting in the middle of May, next week, actually. Next week, yeah, it is next week. Sorry, 2 weeks. And the players are getting 5 games, Joe, in a new competition called Corn and Doon or something like that. Now, it doesn't really matter. They're all pre-season games. So you have Division 2 teams play Division 1 teams, Division 1 play Division 3, and a lot of Division 1 teams probably use the opportunity to use some of their seconds players and stuff when they're playing Division 3 teams. But after that, the league has been given a number of start dates. So Down played Donegal in the first game. So if Down were to lose to Donegal, the Down club leagues would start the following weekend with a full complement of county players, obviously. If Down were to beat Donegal, then the Down club leagues would be put back to another date, depending on Down won the semi-final. So clubs now have a very distinct direction, and they're not going to play any club football without the county players. Sorry, any competitive league football, which I think is a brilliant thing, because there's only 9 games in the league, Joe, and there's going to be promotion and relegation. So it would be very unfair for clubs to play 3 of those 9 games without their county players. So you're talking about clubs playing a third of their league season without county players. So they'll use the first 5 or 6 games, Joe, with their full without their county players, and then full quota for the league. But your sense of tactical work be done. Well, Joe, I had experience myself about 10 years ago, maybe longer. About 11 years ago, I was managing a React at the time. We had 5 in the county panel: Brendan McVeigh, James Colgan, John Clark, Marty Clark. Chris Gillen was there as well for a while, I think. So it was a 5th-year team, or sorry, a 3rd-year team. your starting team were away. So when they were coming back, they were obviously singing off a different hymn sheet, and it is very difficult to integrate them in at that stage. It can be very difficult as a coach, you know. And I was just fortunate enough that the players were very mature. Those particular players were very mature and very respectful. So would have understood that maybe the club were playing a slightly different way and what's Down played in 2010. Now, unfortunately, in 2010, well, fortunately, fortunately, the pity we didn't win it, but in 2010, Down got the All-Ireland final. So it was a difficult year, you know, working with the lads and then having to bring 4 back in. And there, listen, and I think, Joe, again, it comes back to the argument of a split season. You know, it's very, very hard for a player. Joe Coulter, for example, was playing for Mayo Bridge on a Friday night, and then he was going to Down on a Sunday. And he's been told one thing on a Friday night, and then he's been told another thing on a Sunday. That's not easy for a player. That is not easy for a player. So therefore, I feel it should be a distinct split season, and where players can focus on that one team, forget about everything else, park everything else, and then come back and focus on the other team, because it's simply not fair on the player. It's really not. But if I was advising you and you're talking about tactical work away with your tactical work, because, you know, how many county players are you going to have? A max of 6 or 7, you know, so touch base with those lads.
He's got 6, I think. Who has? Noel Dunning, who provides the intensity in the session? Stevie, players, coaches, both, and how?
Listen, Joe, I've always sort of mantra that I always say: the warm up sets the tone for a good session, and you know the players have to like. I'm energetic and enthusiastic anyway. I'm like a wind up. Like one of them wee bunnies, you know, them wee bunnies with the batteries in at times, like, yeah. You know, so I'm on the go all the time in a session. I love energy. I love positive energy, and you know, I like to see energy in a session. And you know, players I think will feed off that as well. But some nights you might come to training. It's been a long day at work. You know, you've had a tough day at school. You know yourself. And some days there you come home and ready to crawl the walls. And sometimes you mightn't be able to bring that particular energy or that intensity, you know, because you're only human, you know. So I think it has to come, Noel, from a mixture. It has to come a mixture, and players have to thrive the session, and not just your senior players, but you're looking then to, you know, where are you unearthing your next set of leaders? And I would also say to the boys in the club, like, where are the next set coming from? So we'll have Joe Coulter there, who's 32 and who's leading the club, and Noel Dunning, who's 35, and he's pushing them. You know, they're setting the tone. But who's going to step up in the next bracket? You know, who then's going to be? Who's going to be in that 19 to 23-year-old bracket? Who's going to be in that 23 to 26-year-old bracket? Who's going to be in the 26 to 30-year-old bracket? Setting them little challenges, little goals. You know, who's the leaders? Who's going to step up? And, you know, and nominate players to go away at times in smaller groups. Nominate them to maybe speak to the group for 30 seconds, whatever it happens to be. But, you know, there's a number of ways in which you could probably try and manufacture an intensity. But, yeah, definitely both. And you're asking how? Well, listen, the quality of the session as well. Like if your session's flat and players don't have a clear understanding of what's going on, games break down, frustration sets in, boys get pissed off, you know. So make sure your games, make sure you're clear in what you're explaining, make sure there's clarity in your explanations, make sure the games there's an understanding, make sure you're prepared. I think that's the biggest thing as well. And prepare, you know, the advert used to come on ITV there, the car coming around the corner and crashing into the ice cream man or something. It was expecting unexpected. You know, when you're out driving, it's the same thing in coaching. You know, expect the unexpected.
Okay. Any more questions, lads? Noel, are you okay with that? Noel Dunning. Yeah. Okay. Well, I think that's it. We're coming to 9:10, Stevie. So thanks very much for that first webinar of our summer webinar series. And thanks everyone for tuning in. It'll be up on the website if you want to tell any of the other coaches. It'll be up there fairly soon. Okay. Thanks very much, Stevie. I've got a semi-final tomorrow night, or sorry, at the weekend, Stevie. So I'm actually tapering my team at the minute. I'll let you know how we get on after it. Okay, thanks very much.
I heard Joe. Oh, sorry, you're not playing. I thought if you were playing, I heard your taper was that instead of drinking 6 cans a night, you were going to drink 4.
It'd be 5, It'd be 5.
Good man. Good man.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, guys. Enjoy it. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks, guys. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. See you.
Thanks, Stevie.